There is a moment, just before punishment begins, when time stops. The accused stands in a public square. Thousands watch. The executioner waits. Everyone knows what comes next. But this isn't about death. Death is simple. Death is mercy. This is about example. Throughout history, rulers understood something most of us forget. Punishment was never just about the crime. It was theater. It was warning. It was the state reminding you, this is what happens when you forget your place. Some punishments were designed to kill quickly. Others were designed to make you wish you could die. And a few, just a few, were so elaborate, so methodical, so strange, that they've survived in our collective memory for thousands of years. Not because they were common, but because they were unforgettable. This is the story of 6 punishments that defined entire civilizations. Not the crimes that triggered them, not the victims who endured them, but the societies that needed them to exist. Because when you look closely at how a culture punishes, you see everything it fears, and everything it's willing to do to survive. Before we begin, understand this. Most ancient punishments were brutal, yes, but they were also boring. Beheading, stoning, drowning, fast, functional, forgotten. The punishments we're about to explore were different. They required planning, resources, witnesses, sometimes days of preparation. Why go to all that trouble? Because these weren't punishments. They were messages. To rivals, to subjects, to history itself. The blood eagle, if it even existed, wasn't just execution. It was psychological warfare. Scaphism wasn't cruelty. It was humiliation at a cosmic scale. Lingchi wasn't torture. It was erasure. Each method tells you something about the society that invented it. What they valued. What they feared. How they understood justice, honor, and power. And here's what makes these punishments so unsettling. They all made perfect sense to the people who used them. We'll move through 6 civilizations. 6 punishments. 6 windows into the darkest corners of human order. Some of these accounts are exaggerated. Some may be entirely mythical. But even the myths matter. Because a society that invents a punishment like this, even if they never use it, is telling you exactly who they are. Let's begin. 1. The Blood Eagle, Viking Age. Northumbria, 867 AD. A Viking army has just captured King Aelle, the man responsible for killing the legendary Norse leader Ragnar Lothbrok. According to later sagas, Aelle's death was not quick. The sources describe something called BLON, the Blood Eagle, a ritual so extreme that historians still argue whether it ever actually happened. Here's what the sagas say. The victim is placed face down. The ribs are severed from the spine. The lungs are pulled out through the back and arranged to resemble wings. If done correctly, the victim remains conscious. If done correctly, the victim can still breathe, barely, as their lungs collapse and expand outside their body. The name comes from the appearance, a human body transformed into a grotesque eagle, wings spread in submission. Now, did this actually happen? That's the question that's divided scholars for a century. Some argue the sagas describe it too consistently to be fiction. Multiple sources. Multiple victims. Always the same method. Others say it's a mistranslation, that blood eagle referred to a poetic symbol, not a literal act. A metaphor for defeat, carved into saga language and misunderstood by later readers. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter if it was real. What matters is that the idea of it was real. The Vikings didn't write their sagas to document history. They wrote them to transmit values. And the value here is clear. Betray us, and your death becomes legend. Not because of how you lived, but because of how we made sure you'd be remembered. Think about what the blood eagle represents. It's not random violence. It's not rage. It's curated. The victim is transformed into something symbolic, an eagle, a sacred animal in Norse culture. The punishment mirrors the crime. Aelle allegedly killed Ragnar by throwing him into a pit of snakes. So his death becomes theatrical in return. This is vengeance as performance art. And the audience isn't just the witnesses in the room. It's every enemy who hears the story afterward. The blood eagle worked because it didn't need to be common. It just needed to be possible. One story, told well, creates more fear than 100 ordinary executions. The Vikings understood that reputation was a weapon. And weapons don't need to be used constantly to be effective. They just need to be known. So was the blood eagle real? Probably not in the way the sagas describe. But the society that imagined it, and made sure everyone believed it could happen, that society was very real. And they wanted you to be afraid. 2. Scaphism, death by exposure, ancient Persia. Ancient Persia. Sometime in the 5th century BC, a man has betrayed the king. His punishment will not be quick. It will not be private. And it will not involve a blade, a noose, or a fire. Instead, he will be placed between 2 boats and left to die in the sun. This is Scaphism, from the Greek word scaph, meaning boat. Also called the boats. It's been described as the most horrific execution method in human history. Here's how it worked, according to the Greek historian Plutarch, writing centuries later. The victim is stripped naked and placed inside a narrow boat. A second boat is placed on top, creating a coffin with only the head, hands, and feet exposed. They are force-fed milk and honey until they develop severe diarrhea. More honey is smeared on their face and exposed limbs. Then the boats are set adrift on a stagnant pond, or simply left in the sun. What happens next is when nature takes over. The combination of honey, excrement, and still water attracts insects, flies, wasps, vermin. The victim is eaten alive, not quickly, but over days. The milk and honey keep them fed just enough to survive longer. The sun burns their skin. The waste festers. Infection spreads. Some accounts suggest the victim could survive for more than 2 weeks. Conscious. Trapped. Consumed. Now, here's the problem. We only have one detailed source for Scaphism, Plutarch, writing about the death of a soldier named Mithridates, who allegedly killed a prince. No Persian records mention it. No archaeological evidence supports it. It's entirely possible this was a Greek fantasy of Persian cruelty, a propaganda tale meant to make the Persians look barbaric. But again, let's assume it's fiction. Why invent this? Because Scaphism does something most punishments don't. It removes the executioner. The state doesn't kill you. Nature does. The state just arranges the conditions. And that creates a very specific kind of horror. Pause. In most executions, there's a moment of human agency. A blow. A decision. A person who carries it out. But in Scaphism, the punishment is passive. The executioner walks away. You are left alone with the sun, the insects, and your own body turning against you. It's not violence. It's abandonment. And abandonment, in the ancient world, was the ultimate humiliation. The Persians, real or imagined, understood something about punishment that most cultures miss. The worst suffering isn't inflicted. It's observed. Scaphism strips away every layer of dignity. You are not killed honorably in battle. You are not executed in front of a crowd. You are reduced to a rotting thing, trapped in your own filth, eaten by creatures too small to fight. You become less than human before you die. And that's the point. Whether Scaphism was real or not, the story survives because it taps into something primal. The fear of being forgotten while still alive. The fear of a death so slow and degrading that no one will remember your name, only your suffering. The Persians, or the Greeks pretending to be Persians, created a punishment that didn't just kill. It erased. And that's why we're still talking about it 2,500 years later. 3. Lingchi, death by 1,000 cuts, Imperial China. Imperial China. Qing Dynasty. 1905. A man named Fu Zhuli is led into a public square in Beijing. He's been convicted of murdering his master. His sentence, Lingchi. Death by 1,000 cuts. Photographs exist of this execution, some of the last ever taken. They show a man tied to a wooden frame, surrounded by officials, while an executioner methodically removes pieces of his flesh. The crowd watches in silence. Here's what most people get wrong about Lingchi. It wasn't torture. At least, not in the way we think of torture. It was ritual. Lingchi was reserved for the worst crimes: treason, patricide, mass murder. Crimes that didn't just break the law, but violated the cosmic order. In Confucian philosophy, the body was a gift from your ancestors. To damage it was disrespectful. To die with your body intact was honorable. Lingchi inverted that. It was designed to ensure you entered the afterlife incomplete. Not just dead, unmade. The process was highly regulated. The number of cuts was specified by law, sometimes 120, sometimes thousands, depending on the crime. The executioner followed a precise sequence: extremities first, then torso, then vital organs last. If done correctly, the condemned would remain conscious almost until the end. But here's the key. Speed was a mercy. Skilled executioners could kill quickly and still fulfill the legal requirements. Families of the condemned would sometimes bribe the executioner to make the process faster, or to give the victim opium beforehand. The punishment was mandatory, but the suffering could be negotiated. That tells you something important. Lingchi wasn't about sadism. It was about balance. Chinese philosophy didn't see justice as revenge. It saw justice as restoring harmony. If you committed a crime that shattered social order, your punishment had to visibly repair it. Lingchi did that by making the condemned's destruction public and methodical. Every cut was witnessed. Every stage was documented. The state wasn't just punishing a criminal, it was demonstrating control over chaos. Western observers in the 19th and early 20th centuries were horrified by Lingchi. They called it barbaric, proof of Chinese backwardness. But they missed the point entirely. Lingchi wasn't cruelty. It was theater, a performance of justice, designed to show that even the most heinous crime could be answered with precision and order. The condemned's body became a canvas. The executioner, a kind of priest. The crowd, witnesses to the restoration of balance. Lingchi was abolished in 1905, under pressure from Western powers who found it uncivilized. But in its place came firing squads. Hangings. Methods imported from Europe. Faster, yes. But were they more humane? Or just more efficient at hiding what execution really is? The photographs of Fu Juli are still studied today. Not because they show suffering, though they do, but because they show something else. A society that believed punishment could be sacred. That even in death, there were rules. That the body, even in pieces, still mattered. Sound, gong echoes and fades. We remember Lingchi as horror. But to the people who practiced it, it was something else entirely. Justice made visible. 4. The Brazen Bull, Ancient Greece, Ancient Sicily. Around 560 BC, a brunsmith named Perilos approaches the tyrant Phalaris with a gift. It's a statue. Life-sized. Hollow. Shaped like a bull. Perilos explains, criminals can be locked inside and roasted alive over fire. The bull's design includes acoustic tubes that transform the victim's screams into something that sounds like a bull's roar. Entertainment and execution. Phalaris admires the craftsmanship. Then he asks Perilos to demonstrate how someone would be placed inside. Perilos climbs in. The door is sealed. The fire is lit. Perilos becomes the brazen bull's first victim. This story appears in multiple ancient sources: Diodorus Siculus, Lucian, Pindar. But here's the question. Did the brazen bull ever actually exist? Or is this just another Greek moral fable? A tale about hubris, invention, and poetic justice? Archaeology has never found a brazen bull. No physical evidence survives. But the story itself has survived for over 2,500 years. And that tells us something important. The Greeks didn't need the bull to be real. They needed the idea of it to be real. The brazen bull represents something deeply Greek. Technology as terror. The ancient world was full of brilliant inventors, engineers who built war machines, water systems, automated theaters. But what happens when that ingenuity is turned toward suffering? The brazen bull isn't just an execution device. It's a mockery of craft, a perversion of art. Think about the design. It's beautiful. Bronze, polished, shaped like a sacred animal. It's functional. The acoustics are engineered. The fire is controlled. And it's theatrical. The screams become roars. The victim is hidden. The audience hears a bull, not a human. It transforms execution into spectacle, but spectacle that distances you from the reality of what's happening inside. You're not watching someone die. You're watching a statue make noise. This is where the brazen bull becomes modern. Because we do this all the time. We engineer distance between ourselves and suffering. Lethal injection looks medical, clinical, humane. Drone strikes happen on screens, thousands of miles away. The brazen bull made death into a sound effect. We've just gotten better at it. Now, back to Parallels. Why does every version of the story end with him inside the bull? Because the Greeks loved irony. They loved the idea that cruelty devours its creator, that the inventor of suffering becomes its first victim. It's a warning. Build a machine for cruelty, and eventually, it will be used on you. Whether the brazen bull existed or not, its legacy is clear. Humans have always been capable of turning genius into horror. And we've always known it. That's why the story survives. Not because it happened, but because it could. 5. POENA CULLEI, the Roman sack, Ancient Rome. Ancient Rome, 1st century AD. A man has been convicted of patricide, the murder of a parent. In Roman law, this is the worst crime imaginable. Worse than treason. Worse than sacrilege. It violates the foundation of Roman society, the authority of the father. The punishment is POENA CULLEI, the sack. Here's what happens. The condemned is sewn into a large leather sack. But they are not alone. Inside the sack with them, a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. The sack is sealed. Then it is thrown into the Tiber River. Let that image sit for a moment. You are trapped in darkness. You are drowning. And you are being attacked by terrified animals, thrashing in the same water, clawing and biting in panic. This is not torture. This is symbolism. The Romans didn't choose those animals randomly. Each one represented something. The dog, a creature that bites its master. The rooster, a bird that attacks its own kind. The viper, a symbol of betrayal, because ancient Romans believed vipers ate their way out of their mother's womb. The monkey, a mockery of humanity, something that looks human but isn't. Together, they represented the condemned's crime. Someone who killed their parent wasn't fully human. They had become something unnatural. And so their death had to reflect that. But there's another layer. In Roman religion, certain crimes were considered so polluting that they couldn't touch the earth. If you executed a patricide on land, you risked contaminating the soil. If you burned them, the smoke carried their corruption into the air. So the solution was water. The river would carry the pollution away. The sack ensured the body never touched sacred ground. The animals ensured that even in death, the condemned was surrounded by chaos. POENA CULLEI was rare. Most sources suggest it was used only a handful of times. But it remained on the books for centuries, right up until the late Roman Empire. Why? Because the threat of it mattered more than the practice. It was a reminder. Roman law is absolute. Roman family structure is sacred. And if you violate it, your death will not be dignified. It will be strange. Here's what makes POENA CULLEI different from the other punishments we've discussed. It's not about pain. The victim drowns quickly, probably within minutes. It's not about spectacle. Once the sack is in the water, no one sees what happens inside. It's about meaning. The punishment exists to tell a story. This person is no longer part of society. They are no longer part of humanity. They are something else now. Something that belongs in the water with animals, in darkness, in chaos. The Romans were obsessed with order. Their entire civilization was built on law, structure, hierarchy. Patricide threatened all of that. So the punishment had to do more than kill. It had to rewrite the condemned, to transform them, in the public imagination, from a person into a symbol of disorder, and then to remove that symbol completely. POENA CULLEI was abolished in the 4th century AD, as Rome Christianized. But the logic behind it never disappeared. We still use punishment to tell stories. We still use execution to define boundaries. We've just stopped using monkeys. 6. The Ashanti execution by silence, West Africa. The Ashanti Empire. 18th century. Present-day Ghana. A man has committed a crime so serious that death is not enough. He must be erased. But this erasure doesn't involve fire, or blades, or water. It involves silence. In Ashanti culture, identity was communal. You didn't exist as an isolated individual. You existed through your relationships, your family, your clan, your village. Your name was spoken in ceremonies. Your deeds were remembered in songs. Your ancestors watched over you, and you would one day become an ancestor yourself. This was immortality. But what happens when the community decides you no longer exist? The punishment was simple. Your name was never spoken again. No songs mentioned you. No rituals honored you. Your family was forbidden from mourning you. If you died, your body was left in the forest, unburied, unremembered. You were socially dead before you were physically dead. And in Ashanti culture, that was worse. This wasn't symbolic. It was literal erasure. Imagine this. You are still alive. You walk through your village. People look through you. Your children cannot speak to you. Your name becomes a gap in conversation, something people step around carefully, as if it were a hole in the ground. You have become a ghost while still breathing. Western sources from the colonial period barely documented this practice. It didn't fit their understanding of punishment. Where was the execution? Where was the violence? Where was the event? But that's because they didn't understand what punishment meant in Ashanti society. For the Ashanti, the self was relational. You were who you were because of who remembered you. Your identity was a story told by others. So the worst punishment wasn't physical pain. It was being removed from the story. This is psychological warfare at its most refined. No blood. No spectacle. Just the slow, crushing weight of being forgotten while still alive. And here's what makes it so effective. The community becomes the executioner. There's no single person to blame. No official to bribe. No moment of mercy. Everyone participates in your erasure simply by not speaking your name. It's collective punishment in its purest form. Some anthropologists argue this practice was less common than colonial sources suggested. Others say it's still practiced in modified forms today, social ostracism that functions as exile. But whether it was widespread or rare, the concept remains. In a culture where identity is communal, removing someone from the community is the ultimate penalty. Think about what that means. The Ashanti didn't need elaborate devices. They didn't need public executions. They didn't need violence at all. They just needed to stop talking. And that silence became a weapon more powerful than any blade. 6 punishments. 6 civilizations. 6 answers to the same question. What do we do with those who break our rules? The Vikings turned execution into legend. The Persians, or those who imagined them, turned it into abandonment. The Chinese turned it into ritual. The Greeks turned it into irony. The Romans turned it into symbolism. The Ashanti turned it into silence. None of these punishments were about justice in the way we understand it. They were about power. The power to define what a person is. The power to decide what they become when they break the rules. The power to make their suffering mean something to everyone watching. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We still do this. We've just gotten quieter about it. We don't use brazen bulls anymore. But we do use solitary confinement, a punishment that drives people insane without leaving a mark. We don't use Scaphism. But we do use death row, decades of waiting, knowing exactly when and how you'll die. We don't use Lingchi. But we do use lethal injection, a process that can take hours when it goes wrong, hidden behind a curtain, so no one has to watch. The methods change. The logic doesn't. Punishment is still theater. It's still a message. It's still about reminding people what happens when they forget the rules. The ancient world wasn't more brutal than ours. It was just more honest about what punishment is. They didn't pretend execution was humane. They didn't hide the suffering behind bureaucracy. They didn't call it corrections or justice or rehabilitation. They called it what it was: a demonstration of power. So the next time you hear someone say the ancient world was barbaric, remember this: every punishment they invented, we still practice. We've just learned to look away. The question isn't whether we're more civilized than they were. The question is whether we're just better at lying to ourselves.